This man needs no introduction, but he did ask for a roast. And I will say, in all kindness, he's the second funniest man at Staffbase person. I'm the funniest. He is only semi-decent at escape rooms. It took us a really long time with him at the lead. But internet expert, Deane Barker, the key to long-term internet adoption. And there will be also a poll.
That was a pretty weak roast, Amelia. But
we're live. We're recording this, Deane.
Yeah, Amelia's right. We did an escape room in New York, and I just did not get it. I like to think of myself as like a very curious, inquisitive person. But man, I was just hopelessly lost. I did have like one epiphany moment during the escape room, but it was more of an accident than anything else. So always makes me feel bad. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming today. Thanks for joining me. I'm the Director of Strategic Engagement here at Staffbase. My job is to really engage with our customers. I run our customer advisory boards. My job is to talk to our customers specifically about how they're using the platform and how they're working with internal communications across their organizations and help us morph and change our roadmap to kind of meet them where they're going. I have a long history in technology and web technology. I got on the internet. I got on the web in 1995. I was a college student. I was headed to law school, but then the internet happened, and I never went to law school. So I've been on the internet been on the web since about 2 years after it was invented. And during that time, I have served as a consultant. I owned a consulting company for 15 years where I did web consulting, and then I went to work for a large DXP provider, digital experience platform provider. These are content management systems around your external web presence. I did product strategy for 5 or 6 years before coming here to Staffbase. What we're going to talk about today is how we apply the principles of personalization to your intranet. And I'm weirdly qualified to talk about this because of my history on the external digital marketing side. I say I'm a recovering digital marketer. I started working in the content management space, pure content management, but that space really morphed into more digital marketing. And as a part of that, a big part of that is personalization. So I have a long history with personalization, both the good and the bad. And I'm going to give you maybe some reality checks here. There may be some things here that maybe I'm not the biggest cheerleader in the world for personalization in some cases. And we'll kind of talk through those. Here. The agenda here is just a quick introduction. I have just a kind of a theoretical introduction based on something that I just read, and I actually did just write a piece for the magazine Reworked on this, why personalization matters. And this is not going to be a dry recitation of statistics. I am generally going to explain why it matters. Then we're going to talk about execution, like how you actually affect it. And the big thing I want to get across in this are the 3 major questions of personalization, the 3 big questions you have to answer. And then just to look at how we actually put personalization in place, because what I find, and I found this on the digital marketing side as well, is that personalization is the thing we love to talk about in theory. But it's one of those things about be careful what you ask for, because if you were to get all the personalization tools you want, you would actually have to use them. And a lot of organizations find out they're just not prepared to use them. They're just not prepared for all the questions they bring. And then I have some principles at the end. I asked myself after I put this together, like, what are the things I want you to come away with? Like, literally, what are if I had you remember anything, what would these be? And so we're going to talk through that. So this is the agenda for today. But first I want to talk about this book. This is a book by a guy named Neil Postman. He's dead now, but he wrote this in 1985. He was a professor at NYU. I think he was a journalism or media professor. The book is called Amusing Ourselves to Death, and it just hit its 40th anniversary. It's a very famous book, but he wrote it in 1985, and it was really a big polemic against television. Apparently in 1985, I was 14 years old, but he wanted to talk about how television is kind of ruining society and shortening our attention spans, and he wanted a return to the written word. And what I find really interesting about this is in 1985, he had no idea what was coming. He had no idea what the internet was going to bring and what TikTok was going to bring and Facebook was going to bring. But it's an interesting book because it brought forth a theory that Postman described, which is called the information action ratio. And this is, I wrote about this piece in Reworked, and we can probably find that link and put it in the chat for you. The information action ratio refers to the amount of information that you can take action on. what this means is that if all the information that's coming into you that you're absorbing during a day, that's 100% of the information, how much of that information can you actually do something about? How much of that information can you take an actual action on? Now, back in the day, back in like the 1800s, it was probably very, very high because you had limited information sources, and all those information sources were in fairly close proximity to you. Someone would come and tell you and say, oh, I can see a storm off to the west that's coming this way. Well, you could take action on that. And the reason why you heard about that is because someone saw it. And the someone who saw it is somebody that you could talk to and is right next to you because you didn't have phones back then. So the information action ratio was very, very high. Now, as technology has expanded, the information action ratio has gone lower and lower and lower and lower. And if you look at 100% of the information that we're confronted in the average day, how much of that can we actually take action on? I mean, just a minuscule percent, single digit percents. Now, your employees have the same problem, maybe on a slightly lower scale. If you look at 100% of the information that comes to them through the intranet and communication channels at your workplace, how much of that information can they take action on? A fairly low amount. And what Postman talks about is how demoralizing this is for people. And what I've talked about in the piece I wrote is that we tend to look at information that we have been given as something that we own and that we're hesitant to give up. And if we can't do anything with that information, we feel a sense of loss, that we've lost that information. And so I think the goal of an intranet is to shield your users from information that they can't take action on. And I put these two images together. I created these with AI. I was very impressed with myself. But the left and the right images here, I think, are the two different theories for intranets. I think a lot of organizations look at the intranet as a fire hose. Let's just toss everything. Let's just push everything out of this hose. And employees will do what they want with what they need. And for reasons why I've explained, like Neil Postman's book, is that this is a problem. When employees are constantly pummeled with information they cannot use, they tend to undercut or reduce the credibility of the source of that information. And so if you look at the image on the right, this is what I think our intranet should be. The intranet should be a shield. They should be shelter from the storm. Our intranet should work to avoid pushing unnecessary information at us. And this is where personalization comes into play. The goal of personalization, really, there's three sub-goals. The biggest goal is don't show people things they can't use. But we're looking at increased productivity. If we shield them from information they can't take access on, it takes fewer clicks, fewer exploration to find what they need to find. We're looking at increased reach. If I'm encountering 100 different pieces of information and there are 3 pieces of information that I really need, if I have to sort through all 100 pieces of information, I might miss the stuff that I really need. Now, can we completely get rid of the 97 pieces that I don't need? Probably not. But we can reduce that. We can reduce that and increase the reach of the information that an employee needs to get. And then the one on the right is kind of a softer thing, but it absolutely matters. Increased reputation and perception. If every time an employee goes to your intranet, they're confronted with information that they don't need and they can't use, they will have a very low opinion of your intranet. I maintain that is the first nail in the coffin of your intranet. I was just talking to a customer the other day, and they have not implemented our software yet. But I asked them, what is the problem with your current intranet? And they said, when I pull up the intranet, nothing has anything to do with my job, has nothing to do with me. So they've stopped looking at it. They've stopped looking at it because the reputation of the intranet is a place where information just gets dumped and nobody does anything with it. And this is where personalization really comes into play. Now, as I said, my background really is in public, like external digital marketing. I worked for a large DXP vendor. And I just want to talk about kind of what they call the 3 waves of personalization in digital marketing. I've been on the web since '95, and the first step down the road of personalization was what we call direct or known personalization. You see that guy there, he's got a name tag on it, it says his name. This is a situation where somebody logs into your website and you know who they are. So this is direct personalization. I literally know this guy is Bob, and I know exactly what he does, and I can do some things for him. The second wave, which happened probably 2007, 2008, was what we called anonymous personalization. With anonymous personalization, we knew that somebody was browsing our website, but we didn't know who they were. What we did know is what they did, and we knew some information from their browser request. We knew maybe where they were. We knew were they on a mobile device. We had all these different clues, and what we would do is that we would put rules in place to say, if this person visits 3 pages down this section of the website and they're on a mobile device, show them this content. So this was anonymous personalization. And then the third type of personalization we got into in the late 2010s was what we call algorithmic personalization. And algorithmic personalization was where no human being was writing rules for anything. We just put early versions of AI algorithm on this and said, send this person content that you think would move them closer to a conversion. And then this is how we used to sell. I'm going to show you actual slide decks from my consulting company that I actually use to sell personalization. And this was the dream. We used to tell people, like, if this is your page on your website that you want to promote something, we're not just going to send them this single page. What we're going to do, and then I would move on to this slide and say, is we're going to divide this page up to all of their different elements. You see, we cut this page up in all these different elements, and then we're going to have a bunch of different combinations of those elements. And then we are going to rearrange and we're going to put those together to create a page specifically for that person in real time. That person will only see a page that literally just exists for them. This was the dream. This was the dream that we pitched. Now, what you find with personalization is hardly anybody who's using the tools that they bought, unfortunately. They would spend an enormous amount of money on tools, and they just weren't using them. So, but this was the dream, is that we were going to do this. Now, this is also, I think, the dream in the heads of a lot of different people on their intranets, is that we're just going to have the intranet as this big pool of information that's going to be dynamically assembled for every single user when they come and visit. So they want to do kind of what I'm showing in this slide here. Is that realistic? For most organizations, no. And we'll talk about why in just a bit. But for the purposes of this talk, we're going to define personalization this way. It's editorial alteration of content or aggregations of content based on the role of the consuming user. Now, notice a couple things. Editorial alteration means an administrator, an editor is deciding how this content gets put together. And then the role of the consuming user. So what we're doing in this case, we're not dealing with people in particular. We're not like setting up Bob in particular. What we're doing is we're dealing with roles, or what we call segments. And we'll talk a little bit later what some of those segments might be. And now I'm going to contrast personalization to say what personalization is not. Personalization is not what we would call customization. Customization is when a specific user customizes their own interface. Now, this is when Bob would go add a widget to his own personal screen, and only he would see that, and adding or removing that widget was entirely within his control. That's customization. We're not really going to talk about that. We're also not going to, we're going to talk about permissions a bit, but personalization is not permissions. If you are talking about actually allowing or disallowing access to a resource, that's a permissions issue. Now, permissions and personalization tend to overlap a bit, because if someone doesn't have access to a resource, most systems will remove that resource from their view. So by giving someone access to a particular resource, their navigation suddenly changes and they have new options. And people think, oh, that's personalization. Sort of. It manifests as personalization, but fundamentally permissions are where someone literally should not have access to this thing. It's also not subscription. A lot of system, ours included, let you subscribe to different resource channels. So you could subscribe to a news channel and say, show me all the news in this channel. Again, subscription is not necessarily personalization as well. What personalization is when an editor or an admin is deciding that this person in this role is going to see this particular content. Now, when we talk about personalization, if you're saying, this sounds great, I want to do this, I want to have a personalized intranet. Great, I've told you why that's important. These are the questions that you have to answer. First of all, you have to, for the question of who. How are you going to subdivide your users? What different groups are you going to create? This is the first question. I'm going to give you some examples when we talk about segmentation, about how you might split this up, but you need to decide. We have this whole pool of employees. How are we going to split them up? Second, it's what tools does your platform offer you to personalize content? Our system offers you a lot of tools to personalize content. You may be on some other software product that offers you less tools. You have to figure out what those tools are, what options you have. And once you've done that, you need to figure out, how do you plan to actually implement personalization? So the who is like, you've got a pile of wood delivered to your construction site. And the with means you get a full tool shed of tools. What are you going to build with it? You can build a lot of different things. You need to figure out what you're actually going to build with that. And there are a lot of different ways you can go on that. Okay, first question, the who question. How are we going to define our segments? We have a group of employees. Let's say we have 1,000 employees in our organization. How are we going to split those up? And we are defining segment here as an identified subset of users to which we can deliver a unique combination of content. Now, one user can belong, and usually always will belong, to multiple segments. So an employee might be a factory employee in your Austin factory, and they might be a new hire, and these all correspond to different segments. Now, the word segment, I'm using arbitrarily. There are a lot of different names for segments. Some groups may call them groups. They might call them audiences, visitor groups, user groups. There's a lot of different ways to define what a segment is. I call it segment just because my background in digital marketing, and because things like groups and user groups tend to overlay on other things, which I'm going to show you here in just a second. So this is an identified subset of users to which we can deliver a unique combination of content. Let's say the master segment is just all your employees. So the master segment, the default segment when you put content in your intranet, is being delivered to every single employee. But there are different ways we can divide this up. I'm going to give you some examples of segments a little bit later. The most obvious way to divide them up technically is by using external segments that are brought over from other user management systems. And this is very common. Our system, Staffbase, integrates with a lot of external management systems. For instance, Active Directory, so Microsoft's user management system. Now, there's no doubt that your IT department has set up a series of groups that they are using to manage security in your organization. This is the default starting point for most users. And the reason why is because they are fairly logically ordered in a segment scheme that you would probably want to inherit. I'm sure your IT group has divided your users up by department. I'm sure they've divided them up by location, and they're doing this not to personalize content. They're doing this to manage IT resources. So Active Directory user groups are a good example. I'll just show you on this next slide. We actually will import directly external segments. So we have lots of users that have Active Directory set up. They've had their IT department manages this, and we're directly just importing those into Staffbase. So if they are in a particular group, when your IT department's put them in a group, they're also going to be in the same group when they come over to Staffbase. Now, this is handy in a default sense. It's handy too because somebody else is managing them. So when a new employee gets hired in the Austin factory, they are getting put in groups by your IT department. So it's not something you have to do. And then we're just synchronizing those groups over in Staffbase. But there's another side of that. That's also a problem because if you want to create a new group, you would have to go to IT and say, hey, can I create a group? And they may have different rules for that. They may say, no, we don't have any need to create that group. That's something you want to create for your thing. We're not going to do that on our side. So you don't have control over external segments usually, which is good because somebody else manages them, which is bad because somebody else manages them and you have to work with them. So we do have the concept, and Staffbase and most other systems will have this around, of what we call dynamic segments. Dynamic segments are formed by a search of profile data, which is often provided from an external system. And again, most of your users have some kind of security profile in your organization, and that would get imported to Staffbase, and all the information on that security profile would come over as well. And an example of that was they might have a particular tag or indicator on their system that would indicate which office they were in, which department they were in, what pay grade they were at. And you can use this information in Staffbase to do a real-time query. And I think I have an example of that here. Yeah, here's an example. So I'm creating a group here, and in this particular group, the membership in this group isn't manual. People aren't explicitly placed in this group. This group is formed by searching what we call tags. In this particular case, I'm searching the profile for the country tag of USA. And if somebody has that tag, then they're automatically in this group. And that's really handy because those tags are probably managed by somebody else. But I, as the intranet administrator, I control the query that forms that group. So I can dynamically control that group. I might be able to create groups that don't necessarily exist in my IT schema. So I have a little more control over this. Now, of course, most systems also have the ability for manual segments. So in Staffbase, we have this. You can create an arbitrary group. An example I put here is, let's say your organization has a medical contact in each department. This is fairly common, I think. Large organizations in each department, they have some kind of medical or emergency. This is the person that puts the vest on and the hat when the fire alarm goes off. Let's say you want to address some content to them specifically, but IT doesn't care about those people. There's no group, there's no tag on their profile. So what can you do? You can just create a manual group. And in this particular case, you're going to create a manual group, and you are just going to add members to it. It's that simple. So you create a manual group, you add these 35 members to it. Now, the benefit of that, extremely flexible, you can add whoever you want to the group and pull whoever you want out of the group, but it's your problem. You have to manage the group manually. So if somebody leaves the company or there's some change, it has to get communicated to you that this person has to come in or out of that group. And then the last type of group is what I'm going to call real-time segments. Real-time segments are a lot like dynamic segments, but they tend to change much more rapidly. An example of this is if a customer or a user authenticated to a specific network, so they VPN'd into some network. You could write a script that altered a tag on their profile in Staffbase to say that they were authenticated to that network at that moment. And depending on how often you updated that tag, they might only be in this group for 30 minutes or 35 minutes. But if you wanted to show a banner on the intranet to anybody who was authenticated to this network to say, hey, we're taking this network down for maintenance, you could do this with a real-time segment. So a real-time segment is one that changes. It's fairly volatile. It might change multiple times during the day. Like, are they logged into their workstation? And if they are logged into their workstation, they would be in a particular group. And if they're not logged into their workstation, they would be in another group. I think I might have an example here. Yeah, I was creating an example here of is logged in. So if they're logged in, we're going to change a tag on their profile and show that they are actually logged into some kind of work group at the moment. Now, the key segmentation questions, when we talk about how we're going to segment these groups up, we have to ask ourselves, what segments are we going to support? We have 1,000 employees in our company. What segments are we going to do? And I'll give you some examples, I think, on the next slide of common segments that I've seen customers do. How are we going to subdivide all the users? How will we identify users in those segments? And this is an important point because you may say, well, I would love to find all employees that are having a bad day and then send them a nice motivational quote at the top of the intranet. That's great, and I commend you for caring about employees who are having a bad day, but what information you're going to use? And obviously that's an absurd example, but there may be situations where you want to address a particular group of users that you can't isolate algorithmically. You can't know them to put in a manual group. They have no particular tag. They know have an existing IT group. You just can't address them. So you need to make sure for everyone in question one that you want to create a group for, you have the information necessary to create that group. And then finally, the last question is, how will you manage the segments? And specifically, which segments will require support from external groups? And you need to put some governance processes in place for that. If you do have IT create a group specifically for you, well, how do you request people moving in and out of that group? How do you do that without this being a whole big thing every single time? You need to make contact with IT. You need to make contact with the person that manages your external groups and figure out what that process is going to be. Additionally, if you're doing a dynamic segment that is based on some aspect of their profile, you might want to check and make sure that that profile object, whatever that is, whatever that tag is, that field in the profile, that's not going to change. That's not going to get removed. You may want to let IT know, hey, we are using this. And so please don't get rid of this or our intranet personalization scheme will kind of malfunction. Here are some common segments. These are just things I've seen. These are in no order whatsoever, but these are things I've seen some customers do. There's some real obvious ones here. Office location, business unit, department. Employment status. By employment status, I mean, are they a contractor? Are they a full-time employee? Are they a part-time employee? What shift? Do they work the day shift? Do they work the night shift? Do they have any direct reports? Are they a manager? What's their union status? You may want to communicate to some people who are in particular unions differently. What country are they in? And I bring that up because that's a larger concept than just office location, because different countries have different HR policies. There are things you can say in some countries and not in others. Are they new hires? For instance, they still in a probation period, or they've been with the organization for less than 90 days. What is their desk status? We use the term desked and non-desked at Staffbase. Are they someone who has a desk and who has a computer, or are they a factory or a field worker where they don't have that and they're working off a mobile device? Are they remote or in person? Meaning, are they one of the office locations? Or are they working from home? And then the idea of affinity groups, we have in Staffbase as well. We have a group concept where users can add themselves to a group. So you could have a book club group and they could add themselves to that. That's what we would call affinity. They have an affinity for a particular group. So do they have affinity for certain groups? And can you use that as information to personalize content? Maybe, maybe not. These are a lot of different things that I've seen, and maybe your organization has seen different things. But what we've done is, because we've addressed this question, is how are we actually going to subdivide this group? This is question number one. If you want to implement a personalization strategy in your intranet, you're really nowhere until you come up with this. And so you figure out what are the different groups and how are we going to address those? Are we going to create a group for a particular reason? Do we have situations where we want to send content to that particular group? Which brings us to question 2. Once you've figured this out, let's say you have a great plan, you love this, and I've got all these groups set up and everything. What tools do you have available to you? Now, this seems like a trivial question, but the fact is, strategic personalization goals have to be funneled through the specific tools which are available. And it's very important that you acknowledge this up front. You are on some kind of technology platform. That platform has tools made available to you for personalization. Some platforms, there's a wide variety of capabilities here. Some platforms offer more tools than others. Our system offers a nice set of tools. Some systems don't offer any tools. If they don't offer any personalization tools, know that up front, because then maybe your entire personalization effort is for naught. So you need to figure out what are the tools that your system offers. And I'm going to show you some examples of things with some screen caps from our system. But an obvious tool that some systems would offer is what we would call navigation manipulation. So this is an example in the screen cap. You can see I've dropped down news, and I've gone to local news, and I've gone to open enrollment resources. Well, theoretically, if somebody wasn't eligible for open enrollment, if they weren't on our benefit plan, or if they were a contractor or a part-time employee, I could remove that. I could manipulate that navigation so they see a different set of options than somebody else sees. Now, this goes back to, when we talk about the goals of personalization, this goes back to increased productivity. We're going to reduce the exploration needed to find resources by taking away options that they can't use. So navigation manipulation is very common. Also, what we would call index manipulation. At a very, very crude level, the World Wide Web is made up of indexes and content. So indexes are basically lists that lead you to content. And when you look at an intranet, there's a lot of indexes and there's a lot of content. We can manipulate indexes. And this is a form of navigation manipulation, but this is an example where in this particular example, we're showing what we would call a news channel in Staffbase. Well, there may be something in there that somebody doesn't need to see. The Gallagher State of the Sector report, I have absolutely no idea what that is, but maybe someone doesn't have a subscription to that particular resource. Maybe we only have a certain number of employees that have a subscription to whatever Gallagher is. Well, we could remove that from the index. We could remove that from the channel so that that person wouldn't be able to see that. And again, we're increasing productivity by reducing the need for exploration. And we're increasing what I would call reputation, because they're not encountered something that they can't use. And then also we're increasing engagement. Every single thing they can't use becomes like a mask to the stuff they can use. And so let's remove those unused options. So we just show them the things that they can use. We also have embedded conditional content. This is interesting. And our rich text editor, you can actually, down to the paragraph level, decide what users should see and what they shouldn't see. We have a very sophisticated rich text editor. And when you put anything on a page, be it content, I have an example here for Brampton managers only. And I'm putting that content on the right inset. That's the content in the page. And on the left inset, you think I'm specifically saying only selected people should see this, the Brampton group, of which there are only 2 users. So literally down to the paragraph level, I'm specifying that this should be shown on the page or not shown on the page. And you can do that with any widget in our system. So be it a news channel or an image or a video or whatever, you can decide that this should be shown to particular users or not. Now, to be clear, this doesn't control access to the page. It just makes the page appear differently for different people. This can be very handy in some situations. Unfortunately, it can become unmanageable in others. If you're going every single paragraph in something and you're particularly customizing it for different groups, you have to manage that, first of all. And second of all, you have to come up with different content for that groups. So this is a situation that comes in handy in very small situations. And then also what we call global element variations. I'll have another example of this later on, but here's an example out of Staffbase. This is kind of a global element, what we call our app launcher in Staffbase. And this shows all the different kind of jumping off points from the intranet. These are all the different systems you can log into. And in this example on the left inset, you can see I'm taking ADP and I'm specifically specifying a particular group, new employees. I don't know why I set it up that way. I don't know why we would want new employees to have access to the payroll system, but say we did, we're setting it up this way, and only then new employees would see that in their particular kind of slate or menu of applications. Now, this list of applications in our particular system is global. You can hit it from anywhere on the intranet. Very, very handy when you need to find the link to something. This happens to me all the time. I'm 53 years old. I don't think my memory is what it used to be. And so all the time I'm like, how do I get to Workday again? How do I get to this? How do I get to that? So we have this great app launcher, and it really can only show you It should be set up to only show you the stuff that you can get into. So these are just an example of 4 different tools that you can use to personalize the journey of your employees. So we've talked about how you're going to segment your user. Now we've talked about the tools that you have available for that. And this is just an example. There are others that I didn't go into, but this is an example of the really common ones, which brings us to the third question that we talked about previously. What personalization architecture are you planning to use? And this, for me, this is absolutely where the rubber hits the road. And this is where a lot of organizations kind of run into a brick wall. They look at their employee base and they figure out we're going to divide them up all these different ways by role and by department and by location, everything like that. And then these are all the tools. They go to a training class. These are all the tools we have. Well, the actual implementation of your strategy is really a combination of the answer to those first 2 questions plus the content that you have. When you take your segments and you compare them to the tools that you have and the content that you have, the answer to there is, what do we need to do to provide this person a good experience? And this really gets back to what we call the soul or the spirit of personalization at your organization. Really, the question becomes, is what are we trying to do? Are we trying to increase productivity? Are we trying to increase relevance? And what specific steps can we take to do that? And I'm going to give you some examples of things that are commonly done. This first example is really interesting because this is how it used to be done a long time ago. This used to be how intranets were managed at organizations that I work at. You would log into the network and you would have a login script that run, and that login script would set the homepage of your browser. And at some organizations, you would set a different homepage based on the user's role. So depending on what department you worked in, when you opened up your intranet browser in the morning, it would load a default page, and it would load one of several pages that were managed by different groups. And the page that you would get would be specific to your role. Now, weirdly, this is not really using any particular personalization tool. I want to say this is kind of a low-grade hack in a lot of ways. There would be a global homepage for the intranet, but essentially we're manipulating users' different profiles to send them to a different page based on their role. So for instance, I was at a bank and I worked in the collections department. When I opened up my intranet in the morning, it would send me to the collections homepage, which would have information specific to my role. Now, theoretically, I could go to the homepage of any other department, but this is the one I saw when I opened the browser in the morning. Back in the day, I think intranets were viewed a little bit differently. We all went to offices. We all sat at company-owned computers that ran login scripts when we logged in, so we could set this up. And everybody kind of checked the intranet, like maybe first things in the morning. So this model actually worked pretty well. This could still absolutely work for you. If you have some large-scale groups and you have somebody that wants to take ownership of kind of the homepage for all those different groups, you can use this to affect pretty good personalization, because that page can be set up specifically for what that role needs to know. Now, what's interesting is the rest of the site is the same for everybody. All you're doing is manipulating where they start. We call it we have a term, front door intranet. You're just manipulating what front door they go into the intranet for, and that can be valuable. So this is one way that we would affect personalization. Another way, still very common, is really a personalized homepage news index. A lot of the information that we push to employees is in the context of what we would call news, kind of push information. And so by setting this up, you can give users an interleaved combination of items. When I say interleaved, is in Staffbase, in many different systems, you have multiple sources of news, you have multiple sources of time-sensitive updates, and then those are interleaved into a single master list. And what you can do in Staffbase is that you can interleave different channels, different news channels, to create a custom list based on the specific set of channels that you are subscribed to. So when I log in, I'm going to see a different list than you're going to see based on what you are subscribed to and what your organization wants you to see. This is very, very common. When somebody logs into their intranet, often they will see a list of news. That news will be specific to them. So this is another thing that people do to affect personalization. I mentioned this before, but an example is personalized quick links. We have our app launcher. Quick links is a very common term in intranet development. That's the kind of set of jumping off points for other applications. So the navigation to deeper resources is really personalized to the user. What we're saying is these are different, all the information resources in the organization. These are specific to you, and here are the jumping off points for that. So this is something that's commonly done. Global elements. So if we have, remember earlier we said that we might create a manual group for people who are the emergency contacts. We'll say that we wanted to tell them something. So we could put a banner at the top of the page. We could put this big yellow banner at the top of the page that only appeared for them. So this is an example of pushing a specific global element to a specific set of users. And then personalized page content. I talked earlier about how in Staffbase, any widget can be targeted to a particular group. And here's an example of this. So on my homepage, I have the newsfeed widget, and this particular newsfeed widget, I'm just pushing to a particular group. What I'm doing is I'm stacking newsfeeds on the homepage. And if you look, it's kind of hard to see, but in that little floating menu there, you can see there's a 1 over the icon of little people there. Each one of those newsfeeds is only accessible to a single group. So on a consolidated homepage, on a single global homepage, I am going to see one of maybe 7 or 8 different news feeds that have been set up. Each one of those news feeds is targeted at a specific role. Only people in that role will see that news feed. So this is an example. If we go back to this, my earlier example of kind of customized, where is that? Customized homepage. Hold on. So this is almost this same model, except take all 4 of those homepages and kind of collapse them into one. What we're essentially doing is creating a set of virtual homepages into a single homepage by manipulating who can see particular elements. So let's move on to some principles. We did talk about the 3 different questions you have to answer. How are we going to subdivide our employees? What tools do we have available? And then specifically, how are we going to use those tools to affect personalization? Here's the first principle, is you need to be brutally honest about your capacity and your need. And this is the thing where I see a lot of organizations fall down. And I saw this a ton in the digital marketing space, but you all see it in the personalized intranet space. We have a thing that we talk about here called the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the thing that people really don't talk about. And the thing that people really don't talk about is that sometimes their organization has no need for personalization or can't manage it. You know, it's awesome that you want to set up 12 different customized news feeds for the 12 different business units, but do you have a person in each one of those 12 different business units that's going to be creating content? Or some of those people can log in and see nothing in their news feed because nobody in their business unit was creating content. Remember, I said that what you do in personalization is a combination of your segments, your tools, and your content. The content, that last thing, is so important. If you create a user that you want to address with specific content, ask yourself, do I really have content for that particular group of users? We would see this in the digital marketing space all the time. Organizations would say, we're going to have a customized, personalized experience. Every time someone logs in, they're going to see one of 12 different pieces of content. And that sounds great in theory, but this is an organization that can't even manage one version of their content, much less 12. So you just need to be brutally honest, because the elephant in the room is that a lot of people want to do personalization in theory. They're not ready to do it in reality. You need to decide what a personalized intranet means from your organization. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to increase productivity? You're trying to reduce support calls? If that's the case, then maybe you just need a personalized set of quick links. You need a place for people to kind of jump off the intranet. Are you trying to increase the reputation of your intranet? Are you trying to increase the transparency of your intranet? In that case, maybe you want more customized news. You need to decide what it means to you, because there are different personalization strategies and they all kind of can affect a different result. What I talked about earlier, don't confuse personalization with permissions, customization, or subscription. Remember, permissions is allowing or denying access, which can manifest as personalization. It looks like personalization, but really, if somebody shouldn't have access to something, then that thing should not appear, and that just should be a default feature of your system. Also, customization, remember, that's when a specific user adds something specific to their page, like they add a specific widget just for them. Honestly, that doesn't get used much. A lot of money gets spent on that. Hardly anybody ever uses it. People who set up their page in a purely custom way, they're much fewer and further between than you think they are. And then also really not the same as subscription, subscribing to like a feed of resources. Start small and obvious. I would really start small and obvious. I would segment by location to start, and then see how much of your information is specific to a location. Start there. That's the smallest and the most obvious thing you can start with. I do not think personalization strategy should be created from the top down. You should not lock yourself in a room and come out with a full-blown personalization strategy, because it never works out the way you think it is. Start with the smallest and most obvious thing you can think of and build up from there. Only implement personalization when it provides value. A lot of organizations implement it just to say they did because they want to feel sophisticated. Only do it where it provides value. Ensure that your segmentation is manageable. If you're going to piggyback off IT's groups, the external groups, that's great, but make sure there's a process for managing those. And this leads me to the key point. This is the biggest point I want you to take away. Personalization needs to be both effective and manageable. And by manageable, I mean both the segmentation, managing the segments, but I also mean creating the content, being able to place the content in different places. There are a lot of organizations that have great plans for personalization, and they're implemented in a way that theoretically would be very, very effective, but it's so hard to manage that nobody does it. And then there are organizations that set up great plans for doing personalization and great governance and great management, but they just don't have that much personalized content. They realize that their need to push content to individual audiences isn't nearly as big as they thought they were. So that's the key point. It needs to be both effective and manageable. And with that, I am done with my particular talk. I am going to turn it back over to the lovely Amelia, who I believe might have some questions for you.
I am back, and I was trying to follow along in the chat. This time, we've already answered one of Tina's, and it might take a full 40 minutes just to answer this one alone. But Seth's question also had a good amount of thumbs up, so this one was popular. What about the culture of creating curiosity in colleagues/culture? Might not be relevant to their job duties, but is highly relevant to their relationships with the company and the people in it. Does that fit into personalization? Our most clicked content is typically new hire announcements.
So loved this question. In fact, I saw this question come through, and I got rid of the sidebar because I knew if I watched more questions like this, I was going to get all hung up on those. And if you look at the article I wrote for Reworked, and again, I will publish that link to you. If you look at that article for Reworked, you can see I did put kind of a sidebar in there, because when I talk about the information action ratio, I'm talking about information that people get that somebody has to take action on, but it's not that person. What this questioner is talking about is what I would call cultural information, color information about the organization. That's not the same thing. That's information I would really push out to all employees. I mean, I'm not going to say that as an absolute global statement, but when you talk about cultural information, like we are doing a charity project in the city or something, that is something, when you're dealing with the morale of the organization, that's something that really should go out to all different employees. So I want to clarify, when I talked about the information action ratio, which I think is a very good concept, we're specifically talking about action directed or action oriented information where somebody has to take action on it. It's just not the person it was sent to. The action of a piece of content might be, we want this person to understand the organization better, connect more with their colleagues, and have a better opinion of the organization. In that case, that's everybody's business. And I would actually push those out to the whole organization.
Great. Well, thank you, Deane. We could listen to you speak about literally anything and just narrate my life, and I would be entertained.